All right, let's go ahead and get started here. I'm Rosa Vogel. I am the program coordinator at the Cold Climate Housing Research Center. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the first class in our spring class series, which is 4 classes. This is the first one. They are every Tuesday at noon. Um, and this is our first class, Understanding Permafrost, How It Affects Your Foundation. Um, our next class is about heat pumps. It's Tuesday the 29th. The following one is common home issues. And the last one is uh, energy efficiency upgrades that pay off. So if you want to learn more about these classes, sign up for our other classes. If you aren't already, you can go to cchrc.org/events. And all of our classes are generously sponsored by the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation and the Golden Valley Electric Association. We'll have a question and answer section after the presentation. So if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat or save it, and we will get to questions at the end. So our instructor today is Thomas Berglund. He has over 20 years of experience with frozen ground as it relates to foundation performance. He is a registered professional engineer in Alaska, District of Columbia, Georgia, Hawaii, Idaho, Minnesota, North Carolina, Ohio, Oregon, and Washington. He runs Syngen Consulting Services, which offers guidance in the areas of building site investigation and foundation planning and design for residents of Alaska and beyond in the circumpolar north. Thank you so much for being with us today, Thomas. We're excited to hear from you.
Glad to be here. Okay, let me see if I can get this stupid little title or this little icon bar to go away. Um, Whatever. Here we go. Let's just give it a try. So you guys can't see that, right? It's blocked. You're seeing my screen as I see it.
Woolly mammoths, right?
Yeah, you see the little toolbar at the top. It should go away, but it's not going away.
I'm not seeing
Anyway,
the toolbar.
oh, you're not? Okay, good. So you can see the title. The title of the presentation, Construction Hazards in Interior Alaska, right? Can you see that?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And then, okay, grand. Okay, so I know it'll go away. There it goes. It goes away. Good. And then specifically perennially frozen ground. It doesn't roll off the tongue like permafrost does. My name is Thomas Berglund. I've been, as Rosa said, I've been at this. I started my undergraduate working for the Permafrost Technology Foundation at UAF in 1995. I didn't know what permafrost was back then, but I was hired from the Rasmussen Library media counter by the civil engineering department, and I was a civil engineering student at the time, to help one of the professors there, who, with a guy named Tom Kinney, was watching houses fall apart that had been constructed on permafrost. All I knew is how to run a survey level loop and collect level measurement information on how these buildings were moving. Alaska Housing and Finance Corporation donated 10 houses to the university in the 80s and 90s. And then I got involved in 95 as part of a 10-year study to try to find ways to fix houses that were improperly or inadvertently built on permafrost. That's how I got my feet wet in it. And then I got hired on in 1997 by a little mom and pop company in Alaska as a driller's helper. And then eventually I became the driller. And then I started my own company, did that for around 7 years and started my own company in 2004. And I've been doing frozen ground for residential, commercial since. And yes, I'm licensed in a lot of states, only one of which has permafrost. The other states are, I do utility scale ground mount solar foundation design all over the country and different parts of the world. So it's utility scale. So it's like anywhere from 1 megawatt to a gigawatt. For frame of reference, a nuclear power plant is about 3 gigawatts. So that's the main thrust of what I do, but I still have a deep passion for permafrost and frozen ground engineering because it's just cool. And we're going to see some cool things in this presentation. So let's see, I better keep going or I'm going to run out of time faster than I need to. Again, so this presentation is intended to be simple homeowner stuff. I have another version of this that I gave to a bunch of engineers, and some of the stuff is in here from that. But this is intended to be just a really brief whirlwind overview of this hazard, what it is, what it looks like, and yeah, how do you deal with it if you already have it? And I kind of alluded to the fact that with all these houses that we were watching for 10 years back in 1995, the conclusion was don't build on it unless you know it's there. And so we're going to go into all that here. Okay, so let's see, what do I got? I stomp out the word permafrost. Let me play that again. Sorry. So I don't like the word permafrost, so I kind of stomp it out and then make it go away. Again, perennially frozen ground doesn't roll off the tongue, but the concept that permafrost is permanent is actually a bit of a problem. And I've had people say, well, it's permafrost. It's always going to be there. I can build on it. It's fine. Of course, that's everybody who's ever built on it knows. But back in the 80s, when a lot of houses were built, including the ones that AHFC stuck with, when the people who built them didn't know and they were holding the notes and they left, and the ones that AHFC donated to the university, they believed at the time you could just insulate and that would take care of your problem, which of course, if any of you are familiar with the buildings on Army Road and Madcap down by UAF, a lot of those houses were built by Louisiana contractors during the oil boom. Anyway, so let's get into some definitions. Permafrost is any earth material which remains at or below the freezing point of pure water for 2 consecutive winters in the intervening summers. Intervening summer. Another way, it's kind of a wordy way of saying 2 years. That's the definition, and who decided to make it that definition, but most permafrost is much older than this. It's a product of a different climate, and it's being sustained by the present climate. And our current average annual air temperature in Fairbanks is, in the last time I checked, around 27 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's going to take a long time for this stuff to thaw out, but it is degrading, it is retreating over time. But yes, most of it's much older than this. And so the point being, yes, it's not necessarily permanent nor solidly frozen. The definition, it's temperature dependent. If it's subsea permafrost, it can be below freezing. Technically, it's still permafrost, but it's not hard. Okay, what do I got next here? Oh, right. Here's my scary thing, which is true. 80% of the state of Alaska is underlain by some form of permafrost. And we're going to get into what that looks like in the next slide. So this is the state, this is a slide, this is an image that came out of the Environmental Atlas of Alaska. It's now been superseded and replaced, but it's one of the ones I saw when I was very, very young in this business. And it shows the distribution of permafrost across Alaska. And the only place that doesn't have permafrost is the white spot, the portions of the state colored white, the Panhandle, parts of the Aleutian, Kodiak, down toward South Central, right? But as soon as you get into the Anchorage area and north, the chances start going up that you're going to about 50 degrees north latitude is where it peters out. Depending if you're mid-continent, this is maritime, but and then we're going to zoom in a little bit here. So you can see the hatch patterns here. There are different patterns, and we're going to zoom in on the Fairbanks area, which is kind of what is of the most interest here. Forgive my graphics. They're a little bit, PowerPoint, but they'll get the point across. So in red, that's continuous permafrost. That means pretty much wherever you drill a hole or dig a pit, you're going to find it. And there's not a whole lot of variation. You see the red dot, that's Fairbanks, okay? Fairbanks is in a region and what most will say a discontinuous permafrost. So some places you find it and some places you don't. Large swaths will be frozen. Large swaths will not be frozen. We'll get into that in the next slide. And then the around where the river or where the water has flown historically, when we're talking about, uh, tens of thousands of years historically, it has thawed out a lot of the permafrost in the places it's been. Flowing water, delivers energy in it, and it will thaw out permafrost. But there are still isolated masses. So this includes North Pole, across the Tanana River, the Tanana Flats. Lots of areas will be frozen solid, and then the stone's throw away, it will not be frozen, and it could be in the footprint of a building, sure. So and then let's see, getting into a little bit more detail. Here would be a typical interior Alaska hill slope. This might be College Hill. This might be Birch Hill. This might be, the hill above Farmers Loop. I think that's part of that is the lead up to Wickersham. But is that right? Is it Wickersham? No, it's not Wickersham. It's anyway, there's another dome I can't think of right now. But the point is, you see the north arrow up there. Where's the sun not? Right? The sun's not on the north face, right? So that's easy. So, but south face, the sun is there. Permafrost is generally absent on mid to upper level south facing slopes. I'm thinking Chena Ridge, portions of Chena Ridge, that is. And then, of course, Ski Boot Hill, Summit Drive, on Farmers Loop. As you start getting up out of the valley, that's the stuff that's colored tan there. It's generally non-frozen silt or less. Won't go into too much about that. But permafrost is generally absent. North-facing slope, the dark brown stuff, that's all permafrost. That's the Gold Stream Valley down there. In fact, that little road down here, or that little feature down here, that might be Gold Stream Road, right? And there's Gold Stream Creek. So permafrost is much more pervasive there. It is generally continuous. I've drilled a lot of holes in the Gold Stream Valley, and I don't think I've found one that isn't frozen, at least within the upper 39 or 40 feet that we drill. And then again, permafrost is nearly continuous on lower south-facing slopes and valley bottoms. Even on southern valley bottoms, this would be north of College Road before you get to the hills, right? Down by University of Alaska, Taku Lot. This little road right here might be Farmers Loop. This little road right here might be College Road, right? And in fact, it is. And then out in the floodplain, permafrost is the patchy. It's the discontinuous, but very, very patchy and sporadic, depending on where the river has been. And then you'll get little micro reliefs. This would be like Chena Point on Chena Ridge. You go up to Chena Point, you climb up over a little ridge, and then you go on a north-facing slope on another, and you get a little microclimate there, and you get patches of permafrost there. And there are patches of permafrost. There's a big black spruce bog up there, where a black spruce bog has no earthly business being. And that's because of that micro relief. The black spruce really likes poorly drained soils. And let's see, how am I doing on time? Okay. All right. So this gives just like here how relief might impact permafrost, the presence of permafrost. Okay. And then let's see. So here's Fairbanks from Google Earth. This is a fairly old image. There are better ones now. I probably should have updated this. But common Fairbanks permafrost is the title of this slide. And so out there is where the colluvial sediments are. That's the deep frozen silt with the massive ground ice. It's found on the lower slopes and hills and in valley bottoms is muck, and that's the Gold Stream Valley. It's generally large ground ice deposits. We are going to see some of those in later slides. Very common. That's where you want to be especially careful. And most of the houses that are built on that stuff are up on engineered foundations, and you'll see some examples of those later on. In engineering parlance, it's considered non-thaw stable. It thaws, it's unstable. It's as simple as that. And then when you get into the floodplain, it's mostly frozen sand and gravel. There is a cap of silt sitting over the sand and gravel in most places in the floodplain. Go out North Pole or go in Fairbanks, and you might dig through 5 or 6 feet of silt before you get into the sand and gravel. And that silt may or may not be frozen. The sand and gravel may or may not be frozen, but it's not deep frozen silt. It's a cap, a little mantle of silt underlain by frozen sand and gravel or sand and gravel that might go 150 to 300 feet in depth. It is the frozen sand and gravel found in the Chena floodplain. Large ground ice deposits are uncommon. Again, we'll see some of those. Ice that's present in the sand and gravel is usually present as fancy word interstitial ice or pore ice. It's filling the pores, but it's not filling or forming big segregated ground ice deposits like wedge ice or lens ice that you might see that you do see in the silts and the fine grains. And there's a reason for that. I might have time to talk about it a little bit. Generally, can be thaw stable. And when I say thaw stable, that means you build on it and nothing happens, right? So that's thaw stable. Usually something will happen, even in frozen sand and gravel, but it's usually very, very minor. And when I do a foundation for something like that, it might be just stiffen with additional like rebar to get a little bit of extra bending resistance. But the word being engineering thaw stability. In my other presentation, I go into a bunch of math after this, but we're going to keep this simple, and we're just going to focus on the word thaw stability or the concept of thaw stable. So just keeping it up there out of the way. As we go forward, what do I have next year? I don't even remember. Oh, okay. When terrain is cleared and or a heated building is constructed, heat from the sun or the building changes the thermal balance, right? So a lot of permafrost has been permafrost because it's insulated by a forest, shade, moss, and it sees the average annual air temperature of around 27 degrees Fahrenheit. So what happens here? This is fun. This was fun drawing. I got a lot of looks at this at the Permafrost conference. But this might be, so the light tan is the cap of non-frozen stuff that looks great and doesn't concern you a bit. And then underneath it is the masses of ground ice and dead mammoths and blue babe. Sorry, a little fun with this one. But of course, somebody goes in and they clear the forest, expose it to the sun, expose it to heat from the building. And so here we go. So the added heat warms the ground, thaws the permafrost, and if the permafrost contains sufficient ground ice, it moves. It'll usually settle, and the building starts doing funny things. And then, so how long does this take? It's a function of the heat plume that develops beneath the building. And a rule of thumb is the width of the building in the first 20 years. And that's got a lot of caveats to it, but the width of the building, at least in the first 20 years. So this might be by year 5, all is well, right? House is fine, no problems. And then play it forward a little bit. By year 10, that heat bulb is starting to get down further and further. And then by year 20, this is not really to scale, but it takes longer for it to get down, but it does eventually get down. And there's the result, the wedge ice that you didn't know was there because you might have dug a test pit with a backhoe 8 or 10 feet. We'll drill to 40 minimum. So depending on the construction, but that's it. That's it in a real quick nutshell. Now, let's see, what do I have? What's my next one? Oh, so here's an example of clearing that was done. This is I worked at Fort Knox for a while, doing a geotechnical investigation for a Denver-based mining engineering company. And so this is they dozed it, cleared the vegetation off, cleared the black spruce, and that's what happens. So, when you're going and you're doing, considering, building wherever you're building, don't just strip off the ground, because you'll deal with the lake for a while until it drains out. Where's all that coming from? So that's a hunk of well, this is actually permafrost. It was seasonal frost when it grew. Those are ice lenses, the little dark bands that you see in it. I don't know if you can make that out, but what I did with this particular sample is I thawed it out and put it in some jars and let it thaw. And so there you see it, right? That's the thaw settlement. You can see about an inch, right? For just a small sample. So multiply that by many samples and you have many inches. And so, yeah, and this kind of stuff is really bad. So that's just kind of a real quick idea of what's going on to create the settlement. The settlement can be minor. If we go back to if there's only a little bit of supernatant water sitting on top of it, the thaw settlement is less. The more supernatant water, the more ice, the more settlement. So settlement can be minor, cosmetic damage, cracking drywall, floor slabs, stuff like that. This would be something like that. This was not a floodplain. This was actually up in the hills, and more settlement happened. But this was the beginnings, and it wasn't going to get a lot worse. In this building, they asked me to come drill. I did, and told them it's probably not going to destroy the building. Not probably. It won't destroy the building, but be prepared to, do some patches and maintenance over time. And it still performs just fine. But, had they known, they thought they were high up enough the hill. And they weren't. And most of it they were, but we'll get into that in a minute. And then in instances, settlement can be major, considerable damage, significant repairs. And so some gory pictures here. I don't know if if you've been around Fairbanks, you might know some of these. There's the garage rotating forward, trying to show it so you can see what's actually going on. The garage in this building was toast. It had to be demolished. The house is still standing. It not super, damage free, but the house is still standing. The garage had to be completely demolished. And I have some pictures of why that we'll see in a minute. And then here's a newer house. This house was demolished completely. So this house, I want to say it was 2003 or so that it was constructed. I took this picture in 2005 or 2006. I worked on this house again in 2014, 2015. They had tried to stabilize it with helical piers. It failed miserably. The person who bought it saw the engineering, saw the math. She was a math teacher for the solution that had been applied to it to try to stabilize it, and assumed that it must be good. They'd done a good job releveling it. The helical piers failed, and this house was eventually, abandoned. I don't know what she did. She was a math teacher, but and the people who built this house, big spruce trees, big birch trees, it just looked okay. But it was on a north-facing slope overlooking the Goldstream Valley up on top of Blaine Hill. And in a place that it just, nobody's silly, okay? It's just, sometimes it looks fine. And it was fine for about 15 feet. But at around 20 feet, it's massive ice. And it took that long for the building to finally just destroy itself. So you can't really see it super well. If you look kind of close, you can see this little planter is out of whack. But if you look real close at the garage doors, they are definitely out of whack. It is going down in this That's where all the ice was. And then if you look at that door, it's already settled a foot. And this was just the beginning. So beautiful house, great view of the valley and everything. And then here's one that was another situation where if you look at the house in the background, it's fine. They built a shop right next to the house, one car width apart, and the garage was not fine, and the building was. So this one we removed it and moved it to a different location. And this one was kind of an interesting one. The owners, this building, it was built like 50 years before I got wind of it, and all the settlement had taken place. And the owner was, well, gee, it's all settled now. What if I put in a new foundation? Am I good? And the answer was, yeah, generally you are. But the cost to do it was really high, and they owed nothing on this cabin. So with doing nothing, they have this. Now it's a log cabin, so it's a lot stiffer than stick built, as you can imagine. Lot more tolerant to movement. And so foundation that was underneath it was all buckled and cracked. That foundation was pulled out, a new foundation was poured, and it was set back down. Now they've got a house that has a market value again. So they owed nothing on it. There was no mortgage on it. There was no note. So anything they did to it that brought it back into the world of finance and bank and sellability was, so they spent maybe $50,000-$70,000 on the new foundation, the house, putting a new one under it, and now they've got a $300,000-$400,000 house. So that's one of the very few instances that at the end of the study that I was talking about for the Permafrost Technology Foundation, the conclusion was it's just too expensive to fix some things that and one of them is a conventional warm shallow foundation that is not designed to be adjusted. It's very expensive to fix it. So and if you owe no money on it, then it could be something worth looking into. If you don't, well, that's what happened to AHFC. They were a lot of people bought houses back during the pipeline boom that were financed by AHFC. They got the people discovered a year, 5 years later that they were on permafrost and they were moving and they couldn't sell them. So they just walked away. AHFC got stuck with the notes and went to the university for help. And that's where I got first involved with it. So anyway, the punchline from this is if left uncorrected, it can eventually render the building completely uninhabitable. Some of you may recognize this depending on how long you've been around Fairbanks. This was off of Farmers Loop Road, and the owner that built it saw the big birch trees, didn't bother drilling, and that's the end of that. It finally was, they put a fence around it, but the kids got into it, and eventually they did a controlled burn. Goldstream Fire Department demolished it just because it became a liability. And here's a more infamous, this one appeared in Smithsonian Magazine. Long story behind this one. They painted the owner as an environmental refugee and saying global warming did that. No, global warming did not do that. Heat from the building did it. But her husband was a homesteader, and he just built a really stout foundation, steel reinforced concrete, real stout foundation, and underneath the thing, and it moved as a unit. And woman, she was 85 years old. This was back in 2000 that I took this picture. It's still visible. It's still standing up there. But they ended up we ended up building her a new house upslope on an adjustable permafrost resistant foundation. So let's see here. Where are we? Okay, not doing too bad. So here are some examples, or the following slides. Oh, funny story. She was painted as an environmental refugee. Again, it was heat from the building that did this, but that wound up in a publication in the Smithsonian Magazine. And it effectively said, see what global warming is doing. It's forcing people out of their homes. Well, no, her husband just didn't know. And heat from the building did that. So there's kind of a spin on these things gets a little weird. I was asked by several people to talk about, the terrors and bad things that global warming is doing to permafrost. And for sure, we're definitely in an interglacial period, and the permafrost is retreating, like the ice sheets began to retreat around 11,000 years ago. Why is that? Are we accelerating it? It's a whole other conversation. But the point was, this woman was forced from her home because of thawing permafrost, and it was painted as something a little bit more than it was. So now what's doing it? What if you guys have already seen some of these pictures, or seen some of them in some other ways, forgive me. This is intended to be simple, but here are some different images that I've taken over the year. That's me. That's arc stuff behind me. That's massive ice in loess, bone dry loess that you would might find anywhere in the hills above Fairbanks. These pictures were actually taken on UAF campus a long time ago, during the expansion of the Geophysical Institute. But all those dark stuff, that's just pure ice. And then I actually cored some of this stuff. Here's another exposure and on a westerly facing hillside in the loess. We'll get into a little bit about permafrost boundary areas. But as you can see, that's all nice dry loess, and that's a little hunk of ground ice, about the size of a small car. And there's my professor back in 2000. That's Yuri Shur, Russian permafrost engineer. He was the chair of the Department of Civil Engineering at UAF the last time I looked, but I think he's retired now. I've talked to him for a few years. But this is some of what we're looking for out there when we're drilling, even in areas. Look at all those big birch trees behind in the image to the left. So I think it's the left. I don't know if this thing might be reversing things. But I actually went out and poured into those ice deposits because I was just interested in knowing what they look like internally, structurally. And then I took a bunch of pictures, shined light through the sections of the core. This was part I'm way beyond versus here, but just to show you distinctions between this ground ice deposit and another ground ice deposit that, if any of you have ever been in the permafrost tunnel, you would have seen a long time ago. Whether it's still visible or not, I'm not sure. I haven't been in there in a while, but that's wedge ice. And if you look real close at it, you can see striations, little lines in it, little scratches, if you like, in it, that are all kind of looking like they're all lined up, and they are. I won't have time to go into a lot about that, but there's another wedge ice deposit. And when you hit one of those and you section it, it looks like that. This again is a bit academic, but if I go back 2 slides and see that is very different from that. And there's a reason for that. Just think of those little lines as growth rings in a tree. Each one of them might be a freeze-thaw cycle, where water and soil made it down into the cast where the ice wedge was growing. And I can answer questions about those if it's all kind of academic. But let's see, do I have it? Oh yeah, I have a few more images here. That one came from Murphy Dome Road. That one is that's a wedge ice deposit exposed in the Side Hill Cut in Fox, not far from the permafrost tunnel. And the idea was, how do I stabilize it? And the answer was, it's complicated and it's going to take a while. But that was just for a road. That was in a road cut. So let's see here. And then in the punchline is the cost of some corrections often amounts to a sizable portion of the market value of the whole. And again, that's what after the better part of 10 years of study, the 10 houses that that we had finished with the corrections. Now, again, this make it really clear. These houses that were gifted to the university by AHFC were on conventional slabs and spread footings, where heat, well, how do you pick up a little flimsy floor slab to adjust it? I mean, there are ways, but none of them are very pretty or lasting. But the bottom line is you have a heated block of concrete in contact with the ground surface. And, the air temperature or the climate that preserved, that made permafrost last at that location as long as it did, was an average annual air temperature of 27 degrees. When you put a warm building on it, now the average annual air temperature of the ground above that permafrost is now 65, 70 degrees. So it's not Fairbanks anymore, it's Hawaii. And so yes, the permafrost is going to thaw. And then what do? How do you get underneath the thing to adjust it, to pick it back up, to try to relevel it? And of course, it's just too expensive to do it. And it saved for a few cases, and AHFC ended up, like I said, they gifted the houses to the university. The university collected rent, and that's how they funded the research. And I believe that I don't doubt the university still owns the houses, the ones that are still standing. Let's see. So, and then here's, my punchline. I get paid to do this. What I've been doing for the last 20 plus years. Permafrost investigation is conducted to characterize the subsurface conditions at a given site. That's where we'll go out with a drill rig. 2 or more boreholes made to search for permafrost beneath the proposed building site. And then you'll see some pictures of, if I have it right. Yeah, so it's just a solid stem auger. And then this last picture is kind of fun. That's the drill rig that we use most of the time. It's a little truck mounted rig, and that was some drilling we did up at Prudhoe. But I don't know if I can go backwards. I can, but I don't think I can pause it. We're just using augers most of the time, and those are the most of the images you're seeing there. That's clear ice that you can see here on the auger. I don't know if you can see my mouse pointer, but that's just a permafrost investigation for residential construction. We're just drilling some holes and probing for it. We're not doing a whole lot of expensive engineering stuff. We're just putting a corkscrew in the ground and sampling. And if it's frozen, this rig is small enough to where the rear end will come up off the ground and the hydraulics go under load, and you're frozen. And then of course, I'll sample and we'll talk about what that means. So the results, from the subsurface conditions encountered in the boreholes, the suitable foundation system is identified and recommendations are provided in a report. And this is an example of a borehole log that I might generate for a site. And this one was up on the Elliott Highway. This was you can't really see super well, but you've got this symbol right here is ground ice. This is silt, and this is weathered schist bedrock. And this black bar right here means it's frozen. So it froze at around 5 feet, and it stayed frozen to the bottom, into the weathered schist. All right, so, and then we can blast past that one. Here are some examples of some permafrost resistant foundations. That's one of the first ones I ever did. Adjustable post on pad. That's on Chino Hot Springs Road. This is done by a friend of mine. It's a space frame. These are sometimes used, not nearly as often as the post on pad. A driven pile. This was down toward Toke, Northway. And then I snipped some from the web in Russia on concrete piling. The big thing in common with all of these is they're elevated off the ground. So heat is interrupted, heat can't get into the ground. And that's the big thing with, you have to preserve the permafrost. Now you won't be able to preserve it forever. It is thawing, So it does have to be adjustable. Depending on, what the depth of this stuff is. Permafrost is at 25 feet underneath the adjustable post and pad. Permafrost was around 6 feet under the pile. That's, I think, out at Area Forum on Farmers Loop Road, I think is where I took that picture with the space frame. And it probably a better part of 10, 15 feet. I don't know where it was in Russia, but concrete piles are not used a whole lot here, but they're used pretty extensively. And then, of course, there are the thermosiphons. For practical purposes, they're passively refrigerated foundations. So, as everybody here knows, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline is supported on VSMs that have thermosiphons installed into them to wick out heat over the summertime and vent it to the atmosphere. This is the flights, and then the other one is the flight service station out at the Fairbanks International Airport. Those are options. They're expensive, very expensive. Homeowners can't afford. And I should let me see, what else do I have here? Right, and this is the end of the presentation. It's worth saying that in Fairbanks, the biggest challenge in a look forward is we are building into areas like a lot of the good ground is gone. And so now we're building into areas where, like, if you happen to be in the Gold Stream Valley, you probably knew you're going to need a permafrost resistant foundation system. And so you might have questions about that, but there are still areas where you don't need to have that, where you can have a conventional foundation that, the banks recognize and everybody recognizes and the market recognizes. But those areas are becoming fewer and fewer and farther between. And we're going to these areas now that have heretofore been not, like when I was there, working with the contractors. I travel, I live all over the place now. But when I lived in Fairbanks and I snowbird up there. But when I lived in Fairbanks full time, most of those contractors would not touch parcels that we're drilling today because there's too many holes. Too much work needs to be done to make sure that there's no permafrost there. And if I can go back a few slides here, back to the pictures with Yuri, back here, there, right here. Sorry. You can see that little guy is not going to be easy to find. I drilled 6 holes and I didn't find it. We found it with the excavation. And that's why I normally go out and look at the excavations when they're being done. But what do you do? How many holes do you drill? Historically, you might have only drilled two holes, but nowadays we're drilling 5 or 6 holes, maybe more, and we're instrumenting them with temperature sensing devices so that we could better understand what's going on in these boundary areas. They're really dangerous areas, and you're looking for a landmine. Effectively, a needle, and not quite a needle in a haystack, but like I said, I had drilled in the upper or in the left-hand image that's panned back. I drilled just to the I don't know if you can see the little outcrop or the little bundle of trees here. I drilled a hole there, and I drilled a hole on the other side too, and I never found this guy, but I knew it was there, and I told the owner after we drilled 6 holes, and she spent a lot of money, that I knew it was there, or somewhere. I just couldn't prove it. And she says, well, geez, I don't want to just keep on spending money. It's expensive. And so I wrote her a report that said, I'll come out and I'll take a look at it when the excavation is open. I did. And I saw some things that got my attention. And I was going to order a test pit here anyway. But by that time, the next morning, the contractor had already dug for a retaining wall footing there. And that's when he hit it. And I'm like, oh boy. So we ended up drilling a lot of holes for this one. But the punchline was we're out into these areas that have heretofore been avoided because they're hazardous, dangerous. And it costs a lot of money to investigate them thoroughly so that we know that we're not in permafrost. And we can go with our conventional foundation. We like to find it with the first hole. and not the fifth hole. So we're very careful about how we go about doing it. But in the case of permafrost boundary areas, it's gotten really, really scary. And so you can learn more about these on my website is on the end of this thing here. Sorry, right there. Permafrostalaska.com. You can see a big write-up about boundary areas and how I go about trying to explore them. And let's see, I think, yeah, probably now is a good time to quit and take questions if there are any.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll read questions that are put in the comments. You can also raise your hand and say your comment out loud or your question. Here's one in the chat. If you are buying a home and have no information on permafrost in the area, how would you go about finding more information? If the home is 20 plus years old without obvious sign of major settling, would you think it's safe?
Okay, where's the house? Is there sorry, are we allowed to, I mean, maybe just whoever it is that wants to ask the question, you can unmute. Doesn't look like we have that many questions. How many questions you got?
Hi.
Oh, hey, can you hear me? Hey, this is Matt Byrne. So, I'm new to the area, looking around to buy a home, don't know all the specifics of each neighborhood, North Pole versus homes on Birch Hill. So I really couldn't give you a specific area.
Okay. Yep. Fair enough. Yeah. So, uh, geotechnical engineering is what I practice. A good hunk of geotechnical engineering has nothing to do with triple integrals about the moon, if you understand math. It's not super technical. It's what can you tell from historic past use? You see a bunch of go up to a piece of raw land and you see wavy terrain, chances are pretty good. There's a reason it's wavy. If there's a house sitting on it, it's been there for 20 years. So the rule of thumb I gave you is the rule of thumb is the width of the building in the first 20 years. Okay, so if the building is 30 feet wide, you might expect the thaw ball go down 30 feet in the first 20 years. That careful with those numbers, but the longer time goes by and there's no distress, the odds are better. But water in the ground will intercept that heat and prevent it from getting down to the frozen stuff or make it take longer. It takes a long time to heat up a pound of water. Latent heat, there's a technical reason for it, but there are things that can extend that considerably. So things you can look at, other buildings in the area, what are they all on, right? There's still no real guarantee that it's there or not. One of the things that I do, well, I've drilled a few thousand holes around Fairbanks, so I know where it is. And most of the time, what I tell people is, you can call me and it doesn't cost you anything for me to look in my database and see how close I've been to where it is you are. And so I won't charge you anything for that. I'll say, yep, I was 2 lots down and it was frozen. Or no, I haven't been in that neck of the woods, but here's what I think. So always, always, always call a consultant. Most of us won't ding you for a 10-minute, 15-minute phone call. I always say drill, drill, drill. There's only one way. There's only one feature that will tell you without a doubt you don't have permafrost. One tree, and it's a palm tree. So, sorry, birch trees, spruce trees, the roots grow out, not down. The black spruce favors poorly drained soils. Why is it poorly drained? If you're in Anchorage, black spruce bogs are peat bogs. If you're in Fairbanks, black spruce bogs are either shallow weathered schist or shallow bedrock or permafrost. Why is it poorly drained? But there are things you can, if you're going into the Goldstream Valley, pretty good chance that it's going to be frozen. You wouldn't want to buy a house that doesn't have an engineered permafrost resistant foundation like I showed you, or you didn't drill it. and make sure. But as you climb up out of the Gold Stream Valley up toward the Vallada, you start climbing out, right? Do they still call it the Vallada? I don't even know. It's an Italian restaurant at where Belaine meets Goldstream. But as you start heading out up that next hillside, you start getting into another situation where you're like Chena Ridge. So it's hard to say. It's impossible to say. But try for the consultant, like I said, myself, or and then of course always drill. Even if the house has been there for 20 years, it might be down there. It hadn't. I have drilled houses before where nothing bad happened. Permafrost was at 35 feet, 40 feet. And the house had been there for 25 years. The Spectre, there's permafrost under it. That's enough to chase a lot of people away from buying it from you. So even if it doesn't cause a lot of damage, if it's not known and the foundation wasn't engineered to accommodate it, and it's down there, and even if it hasn't hurt the house, it's enough of a specter to scare people. Does that help?
He says, yes, thank you. Here are two sort of similar questions. Do you have a map of permafrost sensitive areas in the area? And another question, is there GIS data for permafrost or soil conditions? Is there a map that can be looked at to get a general idea of the soil conditions at a certain location?
That's a good question. GIS is really good for looking at surficial disturbances. And if you go to the permafrost conferences that are current, a good hunk of people are working on remote sensing for a global distribution of what permafrost is doing, right? To see if they can monitor its retreat. And there's of course a lot of stuff that you've heard, it's giving off gases and it's going to adversely impact future climate. And so that's why a lot of funding is being sent that way. As far as a map of permafrost in the interior, there is a map that tells you pretty much what buildings around there will tell you. Boundary areas are a problem. And the maps aren't always right, but they're a good guide. And when I do reports, I put in my reports a picture of that kind of stuff. If you go to my website, you'll see a snippet from one of the maps that was done by a guy named Troy Payway back for Fairbanks Gold a long time ago. He's a geologist and he was looking for gold. And of course, while he's looking for gold, he makes a map, and it's a pretty cool map. It's very, very old. It was done in the 50s, but it just shows kind of what I was saying in that slide that I showed, where permafrost is, in the hills and valleys, north-facing slopes, you find it, and then in the sun areas, you don't find it so much, and that's what the map pretty much shows. As far as a detailed map that's not interpolated or extrapolated, because Payway, smart guy, good map, and it is. Just Google Fairbanks geologic maps and it'll probably pop up. You just have to be careful because of those boundary areas. This is where we mostly are. If it tells you it's non-frozen, it might be frozen. They're not that accurate. But on the in the fine sense, tuning it down fine, it's not that accurate. Globally, it is pretty accurate. From the 10,000 foot view. But as far as a map, I have been asked to make a map because I've got a few thousand holes all around interior Alaska, down towards Seward and all the way up to the Prudhoe Bay. Some out at Red Dog Mine. So I've got an awful lot of boreholes, but they're owned by people. And they're specific to GPS coordinates. So I can't, that information is owned by, if you hire me to drill your house site, and I write a report for you, you own that information. So I can't make a map that's public domain with information you paid for, without your permission. Does that make sense? So, what I can do is I do have a database and I've got all these things in my head, and I would say, where do you want to build? Consulting, consulting, consulting. No matter what you find from a map, no matter what you find from web-based sources, none of it is a substitute for talking to a consultant who's been around and knows what you can expect. But I know everybody wants a map, and part of the research that I do in the reporting that I write is I look at NRCS mapping, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, with the U.S. Department of Agriculture has mapping that usually points to the USGS. USGS has mapping. All of that I go into. Here's what the wise old people say about what should be on your property, and here's what we found. So that's all covered in a geotechnical report, for a fee. But it doesn't cost you anything to call me and say, this is where I'm looking. And maybe that's a good way to, I don't know if there's a lot of more questions, but there's not a lot of consultants who are talk to homeowners anymore because there's just too much liability. And I'm one of the few. Most of those who are either senile or no longer with us. The people that trained me built the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, and they are definitely out there. If they haven't passed away by now. They were pretty hard drinkers, a lot of them. But the real brain drain and the real challenge for CCHRC and everybody else in the interior is that there just aren't very many people who do this anymore. And if you talk to some of the local consultants who are around that do, like, the bigger engineering firms, it's too expensive for a homeowner. We might charge anywhere between $3,000 to $10,000 to investigate a site. That's everything. They'll charge you $10,000 just to open the laptop. And they don't want to talk anymore about residential because it's just too litigious. There's too many lawsuits. And that's an area I operate in and I've been in for a long time. It scares me too. That's why we go into it together. And how confident you are on those results, and I am, is directly proportional to the thickness of, your wallet, how much you're willing to spend to drill the holes. But we get there together. And it's a tricky business because there's just not a lot of help for homeowners in Fairbanks anymore. And I'm one of the few, one of the last, but that are still doing it. Any more questions?
Yeah, so here are another two sort of similar questions. Do you also use magnetic resistivity surveys for your work, or is drilling cores still a cheaper method for house-sized area for building purposes? And the other similar question is, oh, I think I lost it. So just that one then.
Related to remote sensing. So as you heard in my day, or as I alluded to in my day job, I do utility scale solar and I look for rock using geophysics. I've driven post foundations into the ground, like wide flange beams, drive them into the ground, put a solar panel on them. So I want to know where the bedrock is, because we're driving steel beams in the ground, like piles. They're shorter, just kind of glorified fence posts. So I want to know where the rock is. I do use remote sensing a lot. I use shear wave velocity. I use, yes, you can use electrical resistivity surveys to give an idea of what should or could be down there. You have to treat them with boreholes for sure. But to do a shear wave survey or ground penetrating radar doesn't work real good in silt, which is where a lot of these ice deposits are hiding. Because it's got too much mica in it. And the mica, ground penetrating radar is just light. So it's a form of light. And so the mica that's in the schist reflects it back at you, and you just don't get a whole lot from that. Mm-hmm. But yes, there are remote sensing techniques. Drag a sled, do an ER survey. Those might be, like, I do ER right now for solar. It's anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000 to do for a large portion of property, several hundred acres. I don't know what it would be to do just a small one, but you can't really get anybody to do anything for less than $5,000. And then you have to truth it anyway. So yes, you can go out and get the ER, and the ER might say to you, "Hey, I think there's something down there at 35 feet. Drill a borehole and find out." What I use in terms of remote sensing is I use thermistor cables. I will drill the boreholes. So to your point, we drill a hole, or point I think you're making, we drill a hole. Is the soil frozen? Is it hard by the touch, by drilling resistance? That's all we're using. What about when we're in something like those pictures I showed you before, where it's dry loess on either side and it's not frozen, but the ice is 5 feet away? And if you'd have drilled the borehole in a different location, 5 feet away, you'd have found it. What I do to help fill in some of that information is I take ground temperatures. This is something that a homeowner can afford. And I have a thermistor cable. I have 4 of them that will drop into the 4 corners and one in the middle, take temperatures for a week and a half, 2 weeks, and then compare all the temperatures. You can see this examples of this on my website again. We can compare by what I do is we're taking temperatures in each of the boreholes. The temperatures are, the thermistor nodes are at 5 foot, about 5 foot intervals, all the way down to the bottom of a 40-foot hole. So I get a profile of the temperature all the way down. And so what I'm doing is, and I do all 5 holes, let's say, or at least 4, and I'll compare the temperatures with each other, and I'll look for deviations. One of those thermistors shows me the ground temperatures in Fairbanks should be around 35 degrees Fahrenheit. That's usually what I'm 35, 36 on a sunny slope. And if I see one of those boreholes, let's say I see a bunch of the boreholes, they're all hovering around 36 degrees, and one of them is hovering around 33 degrees. Oh, there might be something over there. We might drill, and that helps me to direct where I put my holes. But at the end of the day, the remote sensing is an option. I've used it in heavy mining. I've used it in utility scale solar, and with success, find all kinds of things in the ground that I want to avoid. But the costs are pretty high, and yes, you still end up having to you need a PhD to interpret the information that you're seeing. And then, yeah, normally they'll say, there's error in this science. There's flaw. So drill a hole to be sure. And I would love to be able to mix the two, but we're already, you get around $850 a hole to drill a hole, one hole. By the time you multiply that by, 2 or 3, 4, it starts getting up there. So I would like to use remote sensing if I could, but yeah, it's just then a $5,000 to $10,000 geotechnical report becomes a $15,000 to $20,000 geotechnical report. Does that answer that question?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, sorry. We're running out of time here, so I just want to take 2 more questions quickly. Ryan asks, the width factor makes it seem like building with a narrow footprint may reduce risk.
That would be yes. Don't take that too far. Okay, don't tell anybody I told you that. But yes, the narrower the footprint, if you thermodynamically, if you draw the thing out and you understand how heat transfer works, it's controlled by the short dimension of the building, not the long one. So it's a funny, but yeah, be very careful with that. I should say really quick, I've drilled houses that were built on that principle that, oh, well, it's outside the bulb of the building. When permafrost thaws, it consolidates as it's thawing down. Okay, so the stuff that's thawed in the last 100 years may not have finished consolidating yet. So the permafrost might be down there, but if you have evidence of it in your borehole, the stuff that's above it might not have given up the settlement ghost in terms of thaw stability. So you build your house because the permafrost is down there at 45 feet. You don't care, right? Outside the thaw bulb of the building. Turns out that soil has not yet relaxed under its full weight, and it was settling even though permafrost had thawed out 30 years before. So be very careful with that. I would be caution everybody who heard me say that. Some people will say, "You fool, what have you done?" So just as a general rule, go ahead.
Thank you. And here's just one last question. What's the relationship between permafrost and sinkholes? What can you predict from locations of sinkholes?
The sinkholes, if they're in the loess, so I don't have a picture here, but I can go back very, very rapidly to these guys. This is thermokarst cave ice. These are caves that were formed in the loess that filled with water that froze. Okay, these were actual caves. So those are those thermokarsts in the loess? No, they're related to erosion. In the Goldstream Valley, where you see a bunch of holes open up, where you know there's ground ice down there, yes, those are thermal karsts. But these holes that are full of ice that you see were holes in the loess. This gets into a little bit more than we can talk about here, but these pictures of these ice deposits, these are mud that flowed in for a different reason. But the point was the karsts were already there and they were caused by erosion moving through loess that is sensitive to water because it was put down in a dry environment. It's wind deposited soil, it's loose. If water finds weak spots, it will erode them, make holes, and then those holes can fill with water and freeze. So if you're up in, I've had instances where I've gone out and somebody called me and said, I've got thermal karst on my property, but I'm on a big sunny slope and there's no permafrost here, we're pretty sure. And that's because there's erosion happening in the loess. So my sister lives out on Yankovic, off of Yankovic, and downslope of Scarland Trail is a big karst that opened up in the loess that has nothing to do with permafrost. It's just because some of the permafrost or some of the loess is not as well cemented as others. And when you get an especially wet year, you can get karsts opening up into the loess that have nothing to do with permafrost. There is a relationship between thermal karsts, true thermal karsts, and wedge ice. That's what you're seeing in these pictures here. When that wedge ice there thaws out, yeah, it leaves a big gaping hole. And that is a thermal karst. And you see those, wherever you disturb ground where these things are present. So that is when those wedge ice deposits that you're seeing there melt out, they leave a hole behind. And because the soil around it still holds, but the ice that's almost clear just drains away and leaves a hole. So that's the relationship between ground ice, thermal karsts, ground ice and thermal karsts. They truly are thermal karsts, but they can be erosion related, which have nothing to do with permafrost.
Thank you so much. And I think that's all the questions we're going to get to today. So thank you so much, Thomas. And thank you again to our sponsors, HFC and GBEA, for sponsoring today's presentation. I just want to mention one more time our spring class series. We have a class on heat pumps next week, common home issues the following Tuesday, and energy efficiency upgrades on Tuesday, May 14th. If you want to sign up for those, you can go to cchrc.org/events. I put it here in the chat. And you can also join our newsletter or visit our website, cchrc.org, to learn more. Thank you so much for attending today's presentation, and thank you again, Thomas. Have a lovely rest of your day.
Yep, thanks everyone.